Thank you, Dr. Williams, for taking time to speak to our community this morning. There are a couple things that you said this morning that I think bear a little bit more unpacking, because I think our community can benefit from a deeper understanding. Sure. One of those things that you spoke about was structural competency and the need to move beyond diversity training. So can you talk a little bit about that comment that you made?
One of the criticisms that has been made for a great emphasis on diversity and inclusion, even as inequality grows, has been that many organizations use diversity, inclusion, cultural competence as a badge, a status indicator to symbolize corporate goodwill, while not implementing strategies that would produce meaningful social change. Part of the challenges is that many within our society fail to realize that these implicit biases are not only real at the individual level, but historically, implicit biases on the parts of groups and decision makers and policy makers have led to institutional changes and institutional policies that systematically disadvantage some groups and advantage others. We really need to better understand the ways in which these larger biases have shaped even the policies that drive the day-to-day experiences of many institutions. And structural competence requires awareness of these mechanisms and processes, but also a commitment to dismantle them when we identify them and discover them.
I find when we have these conversations, the knee-jerk response is to kind of devolve to the level of individual level kind of interactions. Yes. I think for our audience, for our community, sure, I think it's really important to make a clear distinction between individual and institutional forms of discrimination.
I'll give you one example of individual discrimination versus institutional discrimination. I will cite two different studies that illustrate that. Researchers at Portland State University decided to ask a simple question. When an individual, an adult, stands at a crosswalk in the great city of Portland intending to cross the street, does your race determine how long you have to wait to cross the street? And they took 3 black males, 3 white males, dressed them similarly, put them at different intersections, trained them to have the same motion, the same behavior, indicating to cross the street at different times of day. They rotated them. And what they found was that multiple cars were more than twice as likely to pass a black pedestrian intending to cross the street compared to a white pedestrian, and blacks had to wait 32% longer to cross the street. That's individual discrimination. We're talking about what individual drivers decided to do given the stimulus of a pedestrian intending to cross the street. I want to give you an example of institutional discrimination. It comes from a congressional election study looking at the 2012 presidential election and how long did individuals wait in line at a precinct to vote across the United States. And what the study found was that blacks waited almost twice as long on average to vote, 23 minutes by blacks compared to 12 minutes by whites in order to vote. None of that reflected the individual behavior of local precinct workers. In fact, it was heavily driven by where you voted place and by the administrative and institutional policies and budgetary allocations that supported voting in different areas of cities and towns and states in the United States. So the bottom line was, there's no question there was discrimination. Blacks waited almost twice as long. But none of it reflected the behavior of local individuals. In fact, it reflected much higher level decisions of, given the population, how much staff are we going to support? How big do we make the precinct? How many stations do we have available for people to vote? But the end result was the same, that even though the precinct workers did not discriminate, there was unequal time spent in waiting to vote simply linked to one's race. So that's an example of institutional discrimination and ways in which we have to think of the extent to which there may be policies built into how we have functioned, how we have done things historically, that systematically disadvantage some and advantage others in ways that have no impact by the individuals actually administering the policies.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, the insights that you have shared with our community and that we'll share with the clinicians and the physicians and others this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.